Things like marriage need to be revamped in order to make sense for both parties. Otherwise, a large group of people are going to opt out, and that's not good for society as a whole. Hey, what's up, y'all? Let's take a look at another It's Complicated channel video.
Can you name any laws in our society that cater exclusively to men or women?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is the draft.
Conscription.
Abortion laws.
There's lots of laws for men. I don't know what they are, but...
I know the divorce laws mostly cater to women for sure. She can marry you and leave you the same day and take half the stuff. That's not fair. That's not really cool at all.
That's gonna be a little inaccurate. I mean, you can void a marriage, I think, within 6 months. So, I mean, I guess it depends on local laws, but leaving the same day, not exactly. But I hear what he's saying.
How do nightclubs get away with charging men a higher admission fee than women? Isn't that sexist?
I mean, yeah, but do I like it? Sure. Because it's the only time women rule.
Men have to pay like $40 to get in, and the woman's free. So I would say, that's sexist.
Of course it is, yeah. But you want to go to a club with only dudes?
Well, how they get away with it is guys are willing to spend a lot of money to be able to get into the club to talk to these chicks. But, how they get away with it, I guess it could be seen as discriminatory. I guess just not enough people complain about it.
If private companies can get away with that type of sexism, why can't they get away with a gender pay gap?
I guess a job is maybe something everybody needs to have versus going into a club or a bar is more of an indulgence than anything. So since work and employment is so much more critical to one's life, maybe that's why.
Oh, gender pay gap. I don't know if there's a gender pay gap, though. I mean, I guess you could say that maybe beautiful women get a position because they're beautiful and gorgeous, and a man probably has to work harder to make his money, but I don't know if there's a necessarily a gender gap in that regard.
Prison sentencing disparity between men and women for the exact same crime.
Definitely how a person looks affects how they're treated. I'll tell you that much.
Testosterone. And men are supposedly more in control, I guess, of themselves. Men, we give women the excuse of, her emotions got the best of her, shit like that. Men don't get that excuse.
Why are men automatically seen as the aggressors in domestic disputes?
I heard about that recently, and I think there was some kind of evidence or study to say that women usually initiated domestic disputes actually more than the men did. So that's interesting.
I think it's because women are more dramatic, even though they cause it half of the time. I don't want to say all the time, because there are women out there that, do go through that for no reason, but most of the time women use that as their advantage to get what they want and be malicious.
I'll tell you this, for most of the child support cases I saw, a big chunk of them, let's just say a big chunk of them, I saw so many of those cases, and the way they started off was from a domestic violence, case. And usually it was a temporary restraining order. That was almost the trick. It's just go file for a temporary restraining order. The court's going to give you emergency legal and physical custody of the kids. The guy's going to have to leave out of the house, per this temporary restraining order. And then it wouldn't be until 6-8 weeks later that the court was able to actually schedule a hearing to be able to hear if this TRO was actually legit or not. But in that 6 to 8 weeks time, mom could come into the child support agency, get an order going, get all these actions done. And then if 6 to 8 weeks later, they drop that TRO, but now the ball's already rolling. The new norm is mom's got custody at that point. And, now it's an uphill battle for dad to try to get custody back and all these things. And even if he actually didn't do anything that was violent.
Let's address reproductive rights. If a woman should have the right to opt out of motherhood and make that choice, should a man also have the right to opt out of fatherhood and 18 years of child support?
I want the answer to be yes. It's just when you look at how the system's designed, the system doesn't care about a man's right in the situation over the child's. And the reason I say that, it reminds me of something. When I first got hired on at the child support agency I worked at a child support agency for 5 years in California. And the courthouse was right across the street from our agency. And while I was in training, we all went across the street with our trainer and we watched one of the court hearings for the child support court happen. And after all the hearings, after they called all the people and they issued all the orders and all that stuff, the commissioner and all the people filed out. We stayed there, and the commissioner, who issued the rulings and all that, actually came out and talked to us. So we sat there by the bench and had a conversation with him. And he shared a story with me that I won't ever forget. He told me he worked on a case that involved a basketball player. And this basketball player had a one-night stand with a woman. And she had came back, a year to whatever later and sued him for child support. Okay. During the case, and this is the commissioner telling me this, during the case, he had asked for a genetic test, and the genetic test came back as he was the father, the NBA player. And he was so confused. He was like, I used a condom. There's no way I'm the father. The test must be wrong. And the commissioner asked him, he said, what did you do with the condom? He said, I threw it in the trash. So it came out that the lady actually took the condom out of the trash and impregnated herself with it. And, there was no repercussions to what she did. I mean, what she did is a gross violation of a person's personal sovereignty. This guy did everything right. He didn't flush it down the toilet. Maybe he didn't want to ruin the plumbing in whatever hotel room these people met up in. He used the protection, but it didn't matter. And there was no criminal charges. There was nothing. The state just sees, oh, there's a kid. You're the dad. That's too bad. We don't want another mouth on welfare and foster care. You're going to have to deal with it. Anyways, yeah, that blew my mind when I was 25.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you shoot the gun and you don't protect yourself, you're going to be paying for 18 years of child support.
I believe if they were married, they consented to that, but if they weren't married, then I think they do have the right to opt out of that.
What reproductive rights do men have?
As far as I know, zero. But do you know why they make men pay child support? Because 1 out of $3 goes to the judge's retirement fund. Fact, look it up.
Should women be required to provide receipts for everything they buy with child support?
Oh my God. Yes, they should. They absolutely should. And I know that sounds really tedious and annoying, but there are so many ridiculous child support orders out there that don't make sense. I think the most recent one was Kevin Costner's $248,000 a month in child support. What kid needs that much money a month to be able to survive? The justifications for that don't make sense. That child support amount should not be more than a certain capped amount. That makes sense for the county that child lives in. Whatever the average expenses are there in order to survive, to be above poverty line, whether that's a 1-bedroom apartment or 2-bedroom apartment or whatever, get the kid in school. That's it. That should be the cap. But, beyond that, it just isn't right. What that also reminds me of is in the law, there are discrepancies a judge can take. If a child support amount is very high, a judge can't technically deviate from that. But, what's going to happen is the other person's lawyers, they're going to come up with all these random expenses like, oh, the kid needs this, the kid needs that, the kid needs this in order to justify it, even if they're not doing it. So they should provide receipts in order to see, is mom really using that money on what they're saying they need to use it on?
Absolutely, because there's women out there buying Louis bags instead of baby formula.
It's funny that we're right in front of Louis.
Louis Vuitton right here in the back.
I know,
the
right?
Louis store.
I didn't even realize it. That's funny.
Why is child support based off income? Doesn't this incentivize predatory women to look for rich men?
People don't understand why the child support system came into existence in the first place. Child support came into existence, and I'm talking about the federally mandated program, came into existence as a reaction to the welfare system. After World War II, there were a lot of widowed women with children, and these women needed support. So that system was created initially for them, and then it evolved into this thing where women who had kids that were born out of wedlock also needed help also, and they kind of got, into this system, and then the welfare program grew and grew and grew. And what you saw in that time was it went from 5% of kids being born out of wedlock. Nowadays, it's at about 40%. In 1975, I think it was around, I think it was hitting like 20% at that time. It had grown significantly from that 5% mark. And the government was seeing this, and they're like, what do we do about this? There's too many people. That's where the idea of a welfare queen became popular. What they decided to do was create the child support system, and the primary goal of it was to recoup the tax dollars that were going out in welfare to these women. So the reason that the system is income based is because it was originated in order to recoup this money from the welfare system. That's all they care about is the money.
Of course it does.
One word, Drake.
There's no reason he should be giving away half his check and more than that and stuff like that. It really should just be enough to take care of a child.
That's 100% true. There should be caps on both child support and spousal support. And that the caps should be based off whatever you can get economists on this, whatever the average expenses are for whatever county that these people reside in. You know what I mean? Like, let's just think about it. I live in Sacramento County. And when I think, how much money does a kid need to survive out here? You know what I mean? Okay, let me try to be really liberal with this too. Let's say kids with a single mom, they both need a roof over their head. All right. So let's say they get a 2-bedroom apartment. All right. Let's say that's $1,800 a month. All right. $1,800 a month. Just a normal 2-bedroom apartment. Okay. And then the kid needs to eat. Let's say $500 a month. Now we're at $2,300. Kid maybe needs to be shuttled around. You know, maybe some mom needs some gas money, these other things. Let's just be super liberal with all these expenses, medical expenses. Let's say this kid needs a max of $3,000 a month, which is a lot of money. It's probably way less than that, but I'm just trying to be super liberal about it. If that's the case, why the heck are there child support orders that are $20,000 a month, $12,000 a month? These are amounts for child support that I've seen here in Sacramento. It's ridiculous. You're incentivizing people to literally predatory hunt, and you're punishing people for being successful and contributing to society. There should be caps on these things, so if someone decides to leave a good relationship with a good provider, they understand that they're not going to get that same lifestyle afforded to them. And this will also incentivize the person leaving to help facilitate a custody relationship with the provider. Because what that means is, instead of them just leaving with all the money, they get some money for a decent enough life to where they're not in poverty. But if they want more, then they need to actually cultivate a relationship with the kid and the dad, because that's how the kid's going to get more from the dad, because there's actually a relationship there.
That's the whole point of child support. Supporting a child. Can they get clothes and food and etc.? That's the whole point.
Why is it if a woman can't pay for her baby, she gets government assistance, but if a man can't pay for his baby, he goes to jail?
You know, that has to do with a lot of times the mom having custody of the child, you know, just as a default. And it costs money for dad to go in there and then file for custody and then make sure that they fight that. But a lot of the reason historically is because women wouldn't have been working. It would have been the man who is providing. So if the marriage broke up, then you have a single mom with the kid, or if they were never married and they just had a child out of wedlock, chances of her being employed is pretty low. So they ended up on the welfare system. So it was just typically women that were doing that, and someone has to stay home and watch the child. So there's all the things. It's harder for them to get employed. So it kind of leads into this culture. Nowadays, a lot more women are working, and that's good. A lot of times what you see is that they will still retain most. Custody court still seems to favor them heavily, and that's definitely something that should change. But a lot of times men are kind of demonized as the quintessential quote unquote deadbeat dad, even if they're not. And this idea of a deadbeat dad came out of this whole welfare culture that really existed before 1975, where you had these welfare queens. People in Congress, government, culture, society were angry about this. They wanted a change. What they decided to do was create the child support program in order to go catch these deadbeat dads. And really, it's just the most economically attractive answer. If you can get the money from this guy, then the government doesn't have to take care of the kid.
Because the woman had to have the whole baby out of her. We both made the decision to have sex. Why shouldn't we both take care of it? Or if she wants to keep it,
You guys should definitely both take care of it.
then I get that is her problem. But if they both agreed and then you want to dump after, I think you deserve the child support.
As far as I know, I think that if a man doesn't have a job, then he can't be on child support. They only can take away some of what you have, so he can't afford it. He just chooses not to pay it. Then that's when you go to jail, right?
That's if a man doesn't have a job, they can still make a child support order against you. Typically, what I saw here in California, they'd use something called presumed income. So if you didn't have income within the last year, they couldn't find income on you and you're not participating in the system and you don't agree to anything, they can use this thing called presumed income, which essentially takes minimum wage and uses that to calculate the amount. Now, if it's presumed and later on they find out you're actually making money in that time period, they can go back and modify it to reflect whatever the true income was. But there's no such thing as like, oh, just because you don't have a job, child support's not going to come after you. They will come after you and the debt will accrue for the amount that you owe, and enforcement actions will happen also. Your passport's not going to be able to get renewed. Your driver's license is going to get suspended. You know, they're going to try to levy any accounts you do have. After all these annoying enforcement actions, you know, the agency is going to be calling you. If you do get a job somewhere, they're going to send an income withholding order in order to get money straight from your check. If they're still having so much trouble with it, then they can file what's called a contempt order against you and have a contempt hearing. And then if you don't show up to that, you know, you can end up going to jail. Now, typically what I saw, not many people would go to jail. They would end up with community service, or they'd make some kind of deal, or, you know, they'd pay a little bit and they'd keep, you know, kicking the can down the road. But they didn't want to throw all these people in jail because there's so many people that are not paying or in this problem that the jails just can't fill them all. So that was the problem here in California anyways. Let me tell you, if we can fit these people in jail, there would be a lot more people in jail for not paying child support.
Men should get some assistance too. Now, don't get me wrong, as a man, we should be able to provide and things like that, but things happen out of people's control sometimes. So yes, a man should be able to. I agree.
Man is the one who abandons, the household.
That's not true. I mean, it's not always the man who abandons the household. It could be the woman who abandons the household. Maybe she just up and leaves one day, takes the kid with her. You come home from work, everybody's gone. You're like, what happened? She flew back to New York. She's on welfare now. You know what I mean? They're living on welfare. All of a sudden, the welfare, the New York child support system kicks in, because as soon as welfare kicks in for the kid, their child support agency is going to get a request. Some caseworker is going to initiate all these things. All of a sudden, they're asking California to get an order against you, and you're like, hey, well, she left. How am I supposed to get custody? They're going to be like, you got to have a custody order? You're going to say no. They're going to be like, well, it's not illegal. And then there you go. You're in the game.
That's what the numbers say. So in majority of cases, it's the woman taking care of the kids.
Why is it when a father abandons his child, they call him a deadbeat dad, but when a woman aborts her child, they call it her choice?
Because it is her choice. It's her body. And if the guy leaves after the baby is born, why didn't you leave before? You should have left before.
I think the better question in this situation would be like, if a guy leaves, he's called the deadbeat. But if a mom leaves the marriage and takes the kid, flies back to New York, you're here in California, whatever, or she just leaves, even if it's 5 miles away, they're not seen as abandoning the marriage. You know, it's going to be celebrated. You know, they're going to construct some victim narrative around that.
That's all I got to say. Should have never fucked her.
I don't know that.
I mean, and that's really what it goes down to, right? You know, just like the NBA player I talked about earlier. He probably shouldn't have been in there. Whatever. He didn't do anything illegal. Where he messed up with was not flushing that thing down the toilet. Or you got the famous Drake case where he put the hot sauce in there. But why go through the rigmarole of the hot sauce? Just flush that thing down the toilet. Or what you can do is you can pick that thing up. It's going to be kind of nasty. If you don't got a Ziploc, just put it in the back pocket of your jeans right here. You know, she's going to the bathroom, freshen up. You grab that thing. You put that in the back pocket of your jeans. Your jeans are on the next to the bed laying there. Everything's cool. You dip out of there. And then when you get to the dumpster, just toss it out, get them jeans washed, and, you know, saves you 18 years of child support, or 21 years if you're in New York.
Be dad's got a good ring to it, but It doesn't seem fair.
If a father leaves before the fetus is fully developed, would he still be a deadbeat?
Would he still be a deadbeat? You know, the truth is, the way I feel about that, kind of goes into my opinions on abortion. And I think if it's like really close to that child being born, and it's past where that baby has a heartbeat, especially, I think that's pretty messed up. So that's going to be your child. I mean, if it's like before that, or you're having a conversation with this people. There was that 7 kids with 7 baby mamas guy, and what he talked about was how he already told these women that he doesn't want to take care of these kids. He doesn't want a kid with them. And if you guys have this understanding, you and your girlfriend or whoever, and you're just like, hey, I don't want to be a dad. We're chilling. You guys are both like, we don't want kids. And then suddenly, maybe she gets pregnant, she wants to keep the kid. You're like, well, hold on. I thought we weren't going to do this. Then maybe that's different. But if you guys are both in the game, you're telling her one thing, you guys are agreeing that this might be something that happens. 6 months in, you decide to leave. That's messed up.
My opinion, no.
I don't believe that a man is a deadbeat. I think a man should have a choice whether he wants to raise a baby or not. And if we actually did some DNA tests on these children, I would say about half the people in this country are raising somebody else's child, in my opinion.
Half's pretty high. I think there's confusion on this statistic. I can't remember it off the top of my head. I think it's like a third of children, but that's only of people who have tests. So the actual numbers, I think, way lower than that. Now, we can't say for sure because not everybody's getting a genetic test to verify this. But I think typically of the people who actually even get genetic tests, it's less than 50%. And the people who end up getting genetic tests are the ones who aren't sure anyways, or they have a good reason to get a genetic test because maybe they were, out on deployment and the conception times just never really added up. So when they got back, they're like, something's weird here. You know what I mean? So half, that's a lot.
Why is it considered a life when holding the man accountable, but it's not a life when holding the woman accountable?
I don't know. I don't like that discrepancy, but I could definitely imagine scenarios where, I mean, if you like I said, if you make the mistake of having a child when you're not ready to, man or woman, you should be held to the same accord.
If we live in such a patriarchal society, where did all these laws come from that protect women and punish men?
It's a fucking delusion, bro. There's no patriarchy at all anymore. The father, thanks to things like Family Guy and The Simpsons, the father is seen as nothing but a fat, bumbling idiot who drinks beer and watches football, and that's all he's good for is just being a wallet.
If men have always...
going back to that question, when it comes to those laws, the people who create the laws do what is most economically advantageous, not for the guy or whoever, but for the government, the society at large. And what they're going to do is if there's a guy over here that they can just, grab and be like, hey, you pay for this kid instead of the government and the collective taxes doing it, that's what they're going to do. Historically, that was not easy to do because it wasn't as easy to determine who the father was. Genetic testing didn't really become a thing until the mid-90s, right? And that was like the saving grace for the government to be able to take someone who doesn't have a relationship with the child, who bailed out, who was across the country, already, and then be like, hey, you are definitively the father and you have to pay. Before that, you would establish someone's paternity based off the relationship they had with the child. So there was a lot more incentive for a woman to actually want to be married and have a kid with someone because then they're legally bound. The child's born within the marriage. If they get divorced, a court hears the divorce. Otherwise, they aren't divorced. And the court's going to decide the issue of paternity. And generally, that would already be presumed because of the marriage. So, and then before the genetic tests, you had blood tests, but blood tests were only good enough to exclude someone as the father. It could never definitively say, hey, this was the father. So when the genetic tests came around, it was just this boon to where it's like, hey, we can get you and say, you're the dad, you have to pay now. And then this was a way of recouping the tax dollar. So that's what it goes down to. And it's just this like, it's this very sort of clunky system that's wildly imperfect, but it's just made to try to stop all this welfare leakage money, and that's how it happened.
Who's been in power? Why would there be a law that you can only have one wife?
Oh, I think that's based on Christianity. That's going to be the U.S., any Christian-based country.
Monogamy versus polygamy is an interesting thing. And, you know, the more I think about it, I think a lot of us are just in de facto polygamous relationships. It's just no one really talks about it, you know, because if you're not married or you're seeing someone or you're seeing a couple people, those people are seeing people, and it's just what it is, you know.
If two drunk people meet and have drunk sex, how do you know who took advantage of who if neither one could offer responsible consent?
You don't know who took advantage of who.
I guess you'd have to try to. That's a tough question. I don't know how you would determine that. Maybe you'd have to look for evidence, someone getting beat up possibly. I don't know how they would do that. There'd have to be a lot of circumstantial evidence, hopefully some surveillance cameras.
So then who's typically blamed in that situation, the man or the woman?
Typically the man.
Because the perception is that the man is the one going after the woman when she's drunk. At least that's what society wants to portray it as.
Well, I mean, you know, that's actually interesting because men are expected to pursue, right? So men are pursuing. So if they're both drunk, then the man was, I guess, trying to exercise his will onto her.
Why are women typically held accountable when they drive drunk, but not when they have drunk sex?
They believe that women can't be predatory, I guess. I don't know.
For some reason, they think women don't have as much control over their emotions or their decisions. They kind of get a free pass in that stance.
And it's almost kind of insulting because it's kind of saying like they're not smart enough to be able to make those decisions, or they're kind of belittling their own agency or volition or free will. And, you know, if someone has drunk sex and, you know, say they don't use protection, which is already dangerous because there's a lot of disease out there and that kind of stuff. But say they get pregnant. I mean, there are so many options for women, especially in first world country, to be able to handle that problem and get an abortion if they so choose. So if they don't do it, I mean, it can almost be seen as predatory. And maybe that was their plan. You know, who knows?
That state.
Why are women seen as victims when they aren't, while men aren't seen as victims when they are?
I don't know, you know, men physically are stronger, and maybe that has a play into it in people's minds. I'm not really sure.
Men are expected to be stronger and just handle the situation and man up. But there are a lot of situations where men can be the victims. And the NBA player I talked about earlier, I mean, he was a victim of some serious predation, you know. A lot of people don't know this, but once a child, and this is federally speaking from the Uniform Parentage Act, once a child is past 2 years of age, you cannot challenge paternity to a court. You know, you can challenge it, but it's not going to go anywhere. So if you're unsure about a child's paternity, if you're the father or not, and you don't file and serve the other party before that child is 2, there's nothing you can do about that. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of guys who find themselves on the other side of legally being a father of a child and having to pay child support for a kid that's not theirs. You know, maybe they find out when the kid's 3 or 4 or whatever. We've all seen the judge shows, the Maury shows. You know what I mean? Those kids aren't all under 2. There's a lot of older kids too. And that's something where an example of where people don't care if a man is the victim of some kind of an insidious plot like that. So that needs to change.
A man is 90% of the time gonna outpower a woman physically. So the perception is that, hey, look, you know, we're gonna feel more sorry for the woman who's getting taken advantage of than a man, because a man can get himself physically out of danger. As far as, like, you know, looking at a man versus a woman.
When men are seen as victims or when they're not seen as victims, that's going to be, in my opinion, how they conduct themselves. Because you can be taken advantage of if you're unaware of a situation, but if you're unaware in the situation multiple times, then that's your fault for not learning.
We had some good questions here. I don't want to drag this video on too long. Definitely check out this video at the It's Complicated channel. I'll go ahead and put a link in the description so you guys could find that. There's actually about another half of this going on, so there's more good questions there. But, I really appreciated this video because there are definitely things that need to change in our system. And I had a firsthand view of this when I worked at a child support agency. I was a child support officer. It was my job to find people. It was my job to genetic test people. My job to figure out how much someone was making, get them, file a lawsuit, serve them with it, garnish their wages, and, get them into the system. And I, as a young man, I saw how this worked, how this played out on a practical level, and the way that our culture is going, things that have changed in the past, women having more control over their bodies, especially because of advances in technology. Things like marriage need to be revamped in order to make sense for both parties. Otherwise, a large group of people are going to opt out, and that's not good for society as a whole. So things need to change. Anyways, let me know what you think down below. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Let's get this channel to 1,000 subs. We're at 907 right now, and a sincere thank you to all those 907 people. Appreciate that. And we'll see you on the next one. Let me know what you think down below.